people every week. It's great. So one of the things that I wanted to give an overview of what we're doing a series called It Takes Two to Gospel. Okay, It Takes Two to Gospel. So we're looking at two books. Those books are James and Galatians, and we're doing them back to back because there's been a bit of a history of some people saying these two books contradict each other. You know, Paul and James have a different idea about things like faith and the law and how salvation occurs. So what we're doing is we're looking through, we started out with an overview of the two books together, and now we're going through James, and then we'll go through Galatians, and we're in James chapter 4. And to give a bit of a recap of where we have been in James, last week we passed the middle point of James. It's 5 chapters long. We have been looking at the fact that this is a letter that was written to, it's probably the first letter written in the New Testament, maybe the first document in the New Testament written, if it predated Mark. And this letter is focused on a scattered community of believers that probably were scattered during the persecutions, the first persecutions. Those believers moved out of Jerusalem into the surrounding areas, into places like, Samaria, maybe closer to Babylon, maybe they went to Cyprus, maybe they were in all of these regions. And so this is a cyclical letter to Jewish believers primarily, but we've seen hints of Gentile coming in. We've seen hints of that because in chapter 2, for example, he looked at the example of a pillar of faith being Abraham, but then he also used Rahab, and Rahab was a Gentile. And so he's trying to draw these things together, but he's been speaking throughout about various themes. And one of the themes we looked at last week, and I don't know if it was a challenge to you, but it was definitely hit me hard, was about the tongue and about how we can be irresponsible with our tongue, and not just irresponsible, selfish. And so this is a theme that we're going to be looking at more today. Actually, I didn't realize how much of the tongue, it's not just chapter 3, the tongue, and then it's over. We saw that the tongue had been a theme that had been building up to chapter 3, and now it's going to be moving away from chapter 3. We've seen that there's also been a theme of double-mindedness. Okay, the idea that you can say that you serve God, but your life doesn't bear the fruits of serving God. And so he's talked about faith without works being dead. He's saying don't be double-minded. Don't have half of your mind this way and half of your mind that way. Half of your mind saying one thing and doing another. Because we're going to be judged, and we saw that last week. And it's not just judged by God, we're going to be judged by other people who look at us and say, has anyone heard someone say, I don't mind the idea of Jesus, but I just hate Christians? That's out there. People are like, Christians are just terrible people, and they judge us. Gandhi is famous for a quote where he said, he would love to be a Christian, except for the way Christians represent Christ. He loved the teachings of Christ, and so we can be our own worst enemy. But we're actually, so it's really odd that God would choose to commission us. So James is talking about how we can get to that stage, how we can depend on him to do the work in us. So chapter 3 ended with this idea, and we'll just read a little bit of chapter 3, how we were ending. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. So this is talking again about don't boast that you're a Christian if you've got these things in your hearts. This wisdom does not descend from above, but it's earthly, sensual, or fleshly, and demonic. He doesn't hold any punches there. It's demonic. It comes from Satan. For we're in chapter 3, and I'm just in verse 16 now. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. He's talking about this selfishness, envy, desiring. So that's where he's going to be launching into for this chapter 4. But then he says, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And these are all things that are double-minded things, Partiality is treating one person one way and another person a different way. Hypocrisy is saying you believe something and acting as if you don't. And that's this double-mindedness. We're going to see him talking about that again. Now, the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace. In peace. Now, we've talked a little bit about peace in James. What does peace, what word would be the word behind peace? If you're a Hebrew like James was, what word would you be using if you were writing this in Hebrew? This is not Hebrew, this is shalom. And I've talked about the idea that shalom is, we think of the word peace and we use it in terms of external conflict more often than not. We speak about, I pray for world peace, or, I want there to be peace between Russia and Ukraine or Taiwan. And, we talk about peace in terms of external conflict. But the word for shalom means wholeness, completeness, peace internally and externally. And so when it says the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. It's sown in completion, in wholeness that extends out of a person. You have that inner peace and it flows out of you. Peace like a river, we sing that song. When peace like a river, it's supposed to be flowing out of us, through us and out of us, from God. And so he's ending chapter 3 on the idea of peace, and then he picks up chapter 4 with the idea of war, interestingly. Why do wars and fights come from among you? So he's saying, the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. But then he's saying, why is there war among you? Why are there quarrels? The word for war is actually a word it's polemia. It can mean war, or it can just mean bickering. Polemia, we get the word polemic. Polemic is like a debate. So why is there debating among you? Now, it doesn't mean that we can't, have different ideas that we throw around, but it's a type of debate that is not respecting the other person. It's trying to push them down. It's trying to win, trying to attack. It's not the purpose of a godly debate should be that everyone wins, isn't it? We all come together and we figure out what the biblical truth is, and then we follow it. But this is about quarrels, about bickering, and he's saying, why is there fights among you? Don't they come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? So it's got the same, there's a different word for war here, but he's talking about a war inside you. That war in your members is not war in your members of the church. That's the word in the Greek for the war amongst amongst the parts of your body. It's really the members of your body. Why is there war in your members of your body? There's a war inside of you, which is why there's a war outside of you. If there's a war inside of you, then what's going to flow out of you? War. If there's peace inside of you, what's going to flow out of you? Peace. That's the context, that's the idea, the contrast that he's making. And he's saying they come from the desire for pleasures. So if peace is this idea of completion, the opposite would be what? Incompleteness. And if you're incomplete, what are you wanting? You're wanting to be complete. Okay? If you're hungry, what do you want? If you're thirsty, what do you want? Okay, so if you're incomplete, there's a natural urge to fill that. And so he's saying that war comes because you have a God-shaped hole in you, is basically what he's saying. There's a lust in you. There's something that's a vacuum trying to suck something in, and you're filling it with whatever you can. And the reason is because you don't have the thing that really completes you, which is God. That's the implication. We're going to get to that. So he's saying when there's wars and quarrels, it's because there's something inside of you. There's a part of you that's missing God there in your life. And he's saying that you lust, and we think of lust today in a sexual sense, but lust is just desire. You want, and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss. You ask wrongly, that you may spend it on your pleasures. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Okay, let's just unpack this. So he starts off by saying you lust and do not have. Okay? Because you're not getting the right thing, you're not holding on to the right thing. So you're lusting, and if you're thirsty, let's say you're thirsty and you drink a Coca-Cola, how long will you be quenched? Not for long. A Coca-Cola is a diuretic. It makes you thirstier. It makes you want more water. If you're thirsty and you drink alcohol, how long are you going to be quenched? Not long, because it's a diuretic. It makes you thirstier. So if you're wanting God and you're grabbing everything else that's not God, how satisfied are you going to be? Not at all. You don't have. You continue to want. You continue to lust. And then it says you murder and covet and cannot obtain. Now, do you think you're actually going around killing each other? He's talking to Christians. He's talking to a bunch of believers. Are they actually physically stabbing people and shooting people? Or that's not what's happening. I'm obviously not shooting, but in that time. But they're not killing everyone. They're not strangling each other. They're not poisoning each other. What does Jesus talk about murder? Hate and speaking hatefully. He specifically says if you say raka to your brother, which is you're stupid, you're a worthless so-and-so, then you're actually murdering them. What was the last chapter about? The tongue. James is actually, taking a leaf out of his brother's book from the Sermon on the Mount. Again, there's so many parallels between the Sermon on the Mount and the book of James. And he's saying, you're murdering. He's using a very extreme word here, because it's really what if you say to someone you're worthless, it's saying you don't even deserve to live. Because God has said every one of us are worth what? We're worth the price of his Son. And so if we say you're worthless, and the Son is the source of life, then we're saying you don't deserve to live. You don't deserve to live. So you're murdering each other. You're saying you don't belong here. You don't belong here. You did something that was wrong, and therefore you don't belong. But he's saying, you murder and covet because you think that if I put that person down, I lift myself up. That's not how it works. If I abuse someone, I don't put myself up. I bring myself down and them. That's not how it works. And then it says you do not have because you do not ask. So this is coming to this idea. There's a lot of irony here. There's a lot of irony. He's saying you want, but you don't get. And then it says you don't have because you do not ask. Well, that's because they're trying to take. Okay? In their lustfulness, they're trying to take. But you can't take God. You can't take God. You can't take God from someone else to fill you. But you only have to ask. So he's saying it's so simple. The things that you're wanting, you can just have by asking. God's ready to give them. He said that right back in chapter 1. Every good gift and every perfect gift comes from above. He's spoken about wisdom as a theme through the book. He's saying if anyone lacks wisdom, just ask and believe. But don't try and take. Don't try and take. You won't get it by taking. You'll get it by asking and receiving. And then it says you ask. You even if you try to ask, you don't receive it because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. You're trying to take God so that you can prop up the pleasures that you've already been filling that hole with. So we start with this God-shaped hole, every single one of us. We start with a God-shaped hole that can be filled with only God, but we learn to fill it with the wrong things. We learn to fill it with the wrong things. So when we grab a hold of God, we become double-minded, because we've got God in one hand and we've got this habit of putting, sex, drugs, alcohol, religion. We can even fill that hole with false religiosity. We can fill it with shopping. We can fill it with money. We can fill anything that you try to fill the God-shaped hole with that's not God is an addiction. It's an idol. It's an idol. It's really an idol. That's correct. And so, this is why we find God and we become double-minded, because we've got to unlearn stuff as well. We've got to be transformed. We're saved, but we've got to be transformed. And that's the process that is being spoken of here. And he's saying, adulterers and adulteresses, don't you know that friendship of the world is enmity with God? You can't be a friend of God and a friend of the world. So he's saying you've got to really look at the fidelity that you're having in your relationship with God. whoever wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. You can't hold both. He's saying you've got to let go of one of them. And I'm encouraging you to let go of the world. Just hold on to God. Or do you think that the scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously? And so it's interesting, he's rebuking envy in this chapter. There's a lot of ironies. I love the ironies in James. He's rebuking envy on our behalf, and then he says that God's Spirit is what? Envious. God's Spirit is jealous for us. There is a good jealousy and there is a bad jealousy. A bad jealousy is where you're wanting for your own good. But if you have a loved one, whether it's a spouse, a child, a friend, and you want their good, and you see them making choices that are harmful, but you're jealous for them to make the best choices, right? That's a good jealousy. God looks at us with that jealousy. In fact, it's in the 10 Commandments. I'm a jealous God. He's not a jealous God in a bad way. He's a jealous God. He wants the best for us. And that's in the context of idols. That is in the context of idols, isn't it? So he's jealous for our time to be spent doing the things that it's supposed to be doing. And then we start to move into this idea of meekness. Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And what is grace? Who would like to define grace for me? Yeah?
Unmerited favour.
Unmerited favour is a very common definition. It's also very limited.
What was it?
Grace, the word grace.
What did you say it was?
The narrator said unmerited favour. Unmerited favour. Has anyone seen the book What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey?
Yeah.
I've read it, and it's half of what grace is. There needs to be a volume 2 for that. Because What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey is a lot of stories about how grace is unmerited favour, it's forgiveness, it's us getting what we don't deserve. But the Bible talks about grace in less of a theoretical sense. That's a theory. If grace is just a God ticking us, as innocent when we deserve to be guilty, then that's just theoretical. But the Bible talks about grace as a power. Grace is a power to overcome. It's more than just declaring us righteous. It's something that transforms us over time. And so he gives grace. If grace is just about the idea that we are declared righteous, then why would it say a little bit later, it says he gives more grace? He gives grace to the humble, but it says, verse 6, at the beginning of verse 6, he gives more grace. You can't be declared more righteous. You can't be declared more innocent. God's giving us more grace because he's giving us more power. Grace is the Spirit. Grace is the Holy Spirit and everything that comes from it. So if we see that grace is just a declared righteous, why is he giving us more declared righteous? We're already declared righteous. You can't do that more. And so he's giving us more grace. He's giving us more power. You could look at John chapter 1 where it says, to them that receive him, he gives them power to become the sons of God. It's that power. Grace is power. And so it's not an impotent thing where he's just crossing out your debts and saying you're no longer guilty. He's saying, I'm going to give you power to become my children. Power to become more like me. And in that context, he gives more grace. In verse 7, we start to get what's called the 10 imperatives. You've heard of the 10 Commandments? Okay, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not, there's 10 commandments there. There's a 10 imperatives here. An imperative is a verb it's like you must do something. So because of all that he's spoken about here, because of this idea of lusting and how God is just there if you ask, because of the fact that he's, saying, don't be two-minded, don't be adulterous, don't be saying you're having fidelity to God and having an affair with the world. Therefore, in verse 7, the first imperative is submit. Okay? That's the first verb that is an imperative here. Submit yourselves to God. Okay? He's saying, come under God. Come under God. You've submitted yourselves as slaves to the world. He started the whole book here. James, a bondservant or a slave of God. He's saying, come and be a slave of God. Okay, and that's not the negative context of slave. That's the fact that we know that we owe God everything, and we just want to be serving him because he's bought us with a price that can never be repaid. Submit yourselves to God. The next imperative, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now that word resist is antihistamine. Okay, it's where we get the word antihistamine. Okay, we get the word antihistamine from this. So it's saying when we resist the devil, we're supposed to be having an antihistamine response to the devil. The devil is an allergy that we are supposed to be resisting. So does the body have its own antihistamine response? No, sometimes we need to take an antihistamine. So who's the antihistamine? It's Jesus. Have Jesus, resist the devil, take Jesus 3 times daily. Okay? Take him morning, noon and evening. Take him 3 times daily with a glass of Holy Spirit. Okay? And resist the devil. Sorry? And he'll flee. As soon as you have it, the allergic response flees. We get this. It's interesting to learn the origin of some of these words, isn't it? So have that. That's the second imperative. Draw near. That's one word in the Greek. Draw near. Cling to God, and he'll cling to you. Cleanse your hands. That's the fourth one. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify. That's number 5. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. So we're getting into those middle ones where it's like cleanse. The solution to all of these things is what? It starts with submit to God. Submit to God, take your medicine, then you resist the devil, and then you draw near to him, draw closer to him, cleansing yourself, purifying your hearts, lament and mourn. Okay, lament and mourn. It seems a bit odd, doesn't it? Isn't one of the fruit of the Spirit joy? But we're supposed to lament and mourn here. What are we lamenting and mourning? Over our sins, over the fact that we've been broken. I mean, we are broken and we're becoming complete. We're being made complete. Lament and mourn. Let it flow through you. You can't really be healed unless you enter into the pain. You can't be healed from something if you don't experience it. The doctor has to go into the area that has the cancer to remove the cancer. And so we need to experience it. Lament and mourn. Again, coming back to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. It's not lament and mourn and that's the end of the story. You'll be comforted. Lament and mourn. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and here it is, we see it. He will lift you up. So all of the things that we're seeing here, if you lament and mourn, he's going to comfort you. If you humble yourselves, he'll lift you up. If you submit to him, then he gives you power to resist the devil and he flees. God is the solution. He's saying, focus on the problem so that you can grab a hold of the solution. Because I've listened to Christian radio stations, in different places, and sometimes you listen and they never mention sin. I've been to churches and they talk so much about the love of God, but they never mention sin. And it's like saying there is a solution, but we're not going to tell you what the problem is so that the solution can be applied to the problem. Okay? The solution has to be applied to the problem. So there's one thing to say, God, you're amazing, you're the Lord of heaven and earth, but unless you say, God, you're also Lord over my sin, you're Lord over the place of my brokenness, you're not going to have that brokenness healed. And now we start to get practical. We start to get a little bit practical, and we see how this is still carrying the theme of the tongue over. Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. I have been guilty of this so much in my life. It is so easy to be offended by something that someone has done. And more often than not, those offences are misconceptions. We just misunderstand things. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. I'm going to read through to the end of this couple of verses, and then we'll unpackage it because it's all wrapped up together. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge one another? So this is a bit odd at first glance. How is speaking evil of another person judging the law? How is it? If I condemn you, if I speak ill of you, if I criticize you, how am I judging the law? How am I speaking evil of the law?
False witness.
False witness? What if it's true? What if it's true? What if you've done something demonstrably wrong and I speak evil of you and criticize you? How am I speaking evil of the law?
Because you're taking it into your own hands.
That's it. Doesn't that same law condemn me? If I'm criticizing you according to the law, and I'm not the lawgiver, and I'm not someone who's clean before the law, aren't I also guilty? Aren't I also to be judged by the same law? We're speaking evil of the law because we're actually being hypocrites. Like judging. That's why Jesus says, I'm the one who's going to judge, not you. You'll judge my decisions later on, but you're not going to judge the people. You'll judge that I'm being righteous. You'll throw your crowns at my feet, but we're not to judge anyone else in the sense of their worthiness for heaven or anything like that. We can say, yes, by the fruits we'll know them. We can go and but we're not to condemn and criticize. Even in Matthew 18, where Jesus says, if someone sins against you, go to that person. And if they won't hear you, take a few others and go before them. And if they still don't hear you, tell it to the church. And if they don't hear them, then excommunicate them, never talk to them again, have nothing to do with them, stone them. Is that what Jesus says? Treat them like a what? Treat them like a pagan and a tax collector. How did Jesus treat pagans and sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes? Drew them in. He sat with them, communed with them. He drew them in. If we see that someone is breaking the law, what are we supposed to do? Draw them in. I mean, we're going to see that I'm just going to skip ahead to where we're going to be in Galatians in a few months. Galatians chapter 6. The beginning of Galatians chapter 6. I can't wait to get here. It'll be a few months till we get there. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you be tempted, bearing one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. James and Paul are like the same person. They're saying the same things. I'm amazed how connected these two letters are in the theme. He's saying, don't judge because you judge the law. If you want to fulfill the law, if you see someone being overtaken in a fault, go and bring them in, draw them in, bear one another's burdens, lift up that person, and that's what fulfills the law of Christ. That's what fulfills. The law is not going to be fulfilled by you who are also guilty before the law, criticizing that person.
What reading was that in Galatians again?
Galatians 6:1 and 2. Galatians 6:1 and 2. So when he's talking about don't speak evil, it's don't condemn. Now, can we point out an evil? Yeah, I mean, you've got to do that to say, hey, I want to pray with you. That's actually what we're going to get into in chapter 5 of James, this idea of praying for one another. But we are not to be speaking of someone as if that mistake they have made, that sin they have done, defines them. Because does our sin define us? Not unless we cling to it. Jesus has provided something that will define us, his life, that we're worthy of his sacrifice. Okay, so this is the tongue. This is the tongue that is evil if we don't submit it to God. But there's another way that the tongue can be evil, and it's in verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, make a profit. whereas you don't know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? It's just a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. It's a pretty tough one, isn't it? Are we to make plans? I know people who take this verse literally. And everything that you say, oh, look, I'll see you tomorrow, they're like, yes, Lord willing. You know, have you ever met someone who's like, if the Lord wills it, and they have to say it, it's like, it's literally, they've learned to say it at the end of every future sentence, and every sentence is about anything that's in the future. Whether it's 10 minutes from now, a year from now, yes, Lord willing. I don't think that it's saying that we have to say that. Okay? It's not that we have to always legalistically say, yes, if God wills it, or yes, Lord willing, I'll see you.
Now, why does it say though?
Yeah?
That instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or do that.
Yeah. So what he's doing is he's comparing two hypotheticals. The first one is a hypothetical of we'll go to this, we'll go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, make a profit. What is missing from this statement?
God's will.
Not just God's will, but seeking of God's will. The plans are godless plans. It's like, God, you're who I go and I carve my Saturdays or my Sundays out for. You're who I carve my prayer meeting time out for. But the rest of my time, that's when I make a profit. That's when I'm doing stuff for me. Does God give us time for just us? Has God given us time to just focus on ourselves? Any part of our lives? Is any part of our lives where he's like, you do what you want with that? Has he given any of that? No. It's not that we should be saying, if God wills, I'll go to such and such a city. It's not just that, because if we're just saying if God wills it, it's missing the point here. If you're going to go to such and such a city, you should be also thinking of how you're going to represent God in such and such a city. If you're going to be buying and selling, you need to be thinking about how you're going to represent God in your business transactions. If you're making a profit, you need to be thinking about how you're going to represent God in what you do with your profit. It's not just about saying, oh, if God wills it, I'll do such and such. That's a very cold way of looking at it. He's saying you've got to include God into those parts of your plans. So if it's not about saying, if God wills it, I'll find a rental here or I'll find a rental there. It's, God, I want you to find me a rental where I can have the most impact for you and your kingdom. You need to be more intentional about it. Finding a rental is not just about finding a place to live. Getting a job is not just about finding a place to work. It's about finding a new mission field. If you're going to go to such and such a city and spend a year there, you should be thinking about how you're going to impact that city for the Lord. Because otherwise it's selfish. You're just going there for yourself. God has given us no element of our lives that we can just be like, this is mine, God. If we do that, that's called a what? An idol. It's called, it's saying, God, I want you to be Lord over 95% of my life. Are we allowed to do that? That's double-minded. The whole point he's making is about double-mindedness. Okay, if we're going to say, God, you're king over my heart, you're king over my whole heart, or none at all. Because that's double-mindedness. So think practically over what we've been talking about. Why are there wars and strifes among us? We need to be, I've talked to Karen about doing, and Karen wants to work with me on making a conflict resolution seminar that we can start doing. Because do we see conflict and fights in families, in workplaces, in churches? It says they ought not to be. These things ought not to be, but they are. So we need to learn skills. We need to learn how to give it over to God. Can you think of anyone that you've fallen out with in your life? This year? This month? This week? This week? This morning? Is it like these are the things that we need to be asking ourselves, how can we let God fill that space? When you have a conflict, it's showing, it's a warning bell saying, there's a spot of you that I'm not feeling right now. So come to me. Ask, not for selfish reasons, but ask that I'll fill that area. And when I fill that area, then there's going to be, then you're going to be closer to completion. Then you'll be, the fruit of righteousness will be sown in peace by those who make peace. You'll have more peace in you, so more peace will come out of you. Who's making plans that God's not included in? We all are. We need to go, okay, those are parts of my life that I'm not letting God into. I'm being a bit double-minded. So who has some confession to make after today? I know I do. Yeah? There's some confession to be made because we want God to fill us, all of us. All my life, all of me. You know, didn't we sing that earlier when we sang, Take My Life? Okay, we sang that this morning. Take my life. I'm going to read it out. If I can get the right one. There we go. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days. Let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of your love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always, only for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee. Take my silver and my gold, not a mite being a smallest amount of money in the Hebrew times, not a mite would I withhold. Take my intellect and use every power as you choose. Here I am, all of me, take my life, it's all for thee. Take my will and make it thine, it shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it's thy own, it shall be your royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour at your feet its treasure store. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee. All for thee. Who's missing peace? Because you're missing pieces. You're missing pieces of God. There's pieces in your heart that He hasn't entered. So let these things that, when there's strife and quarrelling, either inside of you or outside of you, say, God, where do you need to fill? What do you need what do I need to give you? What have I left to give you? These are things where we can go and take the antihistamine. Submit to God. Take the antihistamine. The devil will flee. It's good, isn't it? It's just take 3 times daily, morning, noon, and evening, with a meal, and the devil will flee. It's that easy. Ask Him. He's already there. He's ready to just fill your life. This chapter finishes with this verse, which applies to a lot of what James has been talking about. Therefore, to the person, or to him, to the person who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. We think of sin in terms of... That's verse 17, end of chapter 4. And that's what we're going to finish on. Is we often think of sin in terms of a thing that is quantifiable. It's like, I might, kick the rubbish can, in frustration, or I say something nasty to someone, or I go and drink alcohol, or I might, have an affair. Any of those sort of things. We think of it in terms of things that we do. Sin is not a verb, primarily. We do have verbal sin, things that flow out of it, but sin is a noun. Sin is a quality. It's a state of being. And so he's saying, anyone who knows to do good and does not do it, anyone who knows what is good, it is God, really. Anyone who knows God and doesn't receive Him, anyone who knows not to speak evil and doesn't do it, it's sin. It's showing that you are in a state of incompleteness. You're in a state of separation. There's a part of you that's separated from God. So anyone who knows to do good and does not do it, it's sin. He's saying that any of the things that I've spoken in the 4 chapters before this, that you're struggling with, and James is one of the books that the reason Luther was probably wanting to get it out of the New Testament is because it is such a struggle. It's such a challenge. But he's saying, this is a symptom. Any of these things that you're seeing, that you're going, I'm having troubles here. This chapter is really a struggle for me. It's saying, go and see your doctor, take three Jesuses daily. That's what it's saying. Whenever we see the struggles, whenever we see those sins, this manifestation of sin, it's saying, God, you need to fill me more. I need to be filled in this area. So let's have a prayer. Let's close with prayer, and we'll also pray for the meal. But I really want to challenge you to take this and over the week, think of the things that God can fill you in your life that are being manifested by the things that have been challenging you in the book of James or in the rest of the Bible. If there's a part of the Bible that you don't like to go to because it's like too confronting, go there and say, God, what are you telling me about my heart, my brokenness, that you want to repair, that you want to fix, that you want to heal? Because I'm ready. I want to take it. Let's have a prayer for that and for the food. Dear Father, I'm double-minded. There are times that I do not represent you well. And I think that is something that is a common malady of the human condition. We take a hold of you with one hand, but we've had such a lifetime of learned behaviors and patterns of filling our hole with anything but you. Now that we've got you, take those things out of our lives that we can be filled more with you. Help us to really examine ourselves, whether there's anywhere where we're failing to represent you. James is pretty confronting, and we're thankful that it's in the Bible and that we can see those warning lights going off in our lives. Not warning lights that are supposed to drive us to despair or to feeling worthless, but to drive us to you. We want to submit ourselves to you. We want to take the antihistamine. We want to take the resistance. We want to build up an antibody response to sin. We want to build up a closer relationship with you. That requires humility. That requires admitting that our self still there and has to be killed daily, moment by moment even. Father, I ask you to convict every one of us that we may be not evil speaking of one another, trying to tear people down, but we want to build people up. I thank you that this community does that really well, but I mean, we're not perfect. And if we want to be effective in this community, we need to be better at it. So Father, make me better. And maybe that be the prayer of every single one of us. As we eat our meal, pray that you'll please bless it, but also bless the conversation. Help it to be centered around you. Help us to continue to build you up in each other's lives. And we're just thankful that we are a community such as that. In Jesus' name, amen.